Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Let's Talk Organics March webinar. And this evening's topic, we're going to look at feeding the ewe pre and post lambing on an organic farm. Our lineup this evening is we're going to listen to two organic farmers who are going to tell their stories and what they do when getting ready pre-lambing and after lambing, what they do in relation to feeding the flock. And I'm also joined by two of my colleagues, Michael Gottstein, head of sheep, who's going to go through what you should be feeding in relation to the requirements for the ewe in lamb and after lambing. And then we're going to hear from Cathal McCauley, who is going to tell us about, in relation to organic farming, what are the regulations as regards feed and mineral supplementation. I will say to you, as we're not going to take any questions until everybody has spoken. So put your answers in the questions and answer function on your laptop, and we'll have all panelists back in the room when we have heard from everybody. So without further ado, we're going to go to North Leitrim to hear from our first farmer, and I want to introduce you to Barry O'Hagan. Barry is farming organically since the 1st of January of this year, so he's a new entrant to organics. His farm is based in Manorhamilton, which is just outside the village of Manorhamilton. He's farming approximately 56 hectares of land, and on that he has 158 ewes, which are predominantly Lanark black-faced horn sheep. The lambs are typically sold as breeding ewe lambs, with the rams then being finished on the farm. So I'm going to hand you over now. We have a video with Barry talking to Cathal as regards what he's doing in the whole area of feeding.
Okay, so can you describe your farming system for us, Barry, and maybe give us an idea why you decided to convert to organics?
Well, I suppose really it's to do with costs. The input cost is just too much. Feed and fertilizer, diesel, everything is just not paying. Like we have predominantly all our ewes as black-faced hill sheep. This is the first year we bought a few lowland sheep. We've only 20 some, but we've a total of 156 or 58 ewes. We have a kind of a niche for the trade for selling, we sell our ewe lambs in at the special show and sale in Ballinrobe, the West of Ireland Blackfish Sheep Society, and we usually finish all our ram lambs, but that's not going to be cost efficient now to be finishing ram lambs at the price of feed and everything. So that's one of the main reasons why I suppose we're being forced out of it with the costs of feed and fertilizer. So that'd be the main reason.
So you see yourself reducing inputs within the organic system and keeping costs down?
Certainly, we'll have to reduce the number of ewes we have because we have very margin type land. This would be our worst land here. It's a hilly farm. It's dry. It's suitable for feeding the stock. We have 75 or 78 acres waste since Christmas or whatever. It's starting to fresh up. We'll move these sheep down to the lower of the land, the 24th, 25th of March. That's when we start lambing. So it's just keeping down the costs, really, making it viable to farm. Really, at the moment it's not paying.
You have a hill type ewe, but you scan relatively well, Barry. Can you just maybe give us an idea of your scanning rates for?
Yeah, we'd only 6 dry ewes. We've a scanning rate there 1.75, 40 something odd singles. We had singles here on the upper side and some of the twins here. We've a rented farm down at around the town there in Manorhamilton. We've 50 odd ewes there. We've 14 triplets. You know, they're more a nuisance than anything else, but scan very well. We've 40 or 50 sheep less this winter. We usually had 40 hogs we keep. We're 10 or 15 ewes less as well, which meant that we had a lot more surplus grass. We had this particular farm here, there's 35 acres. It was waste since last September. So we really only started feeding the ewes there with silage about the 20th of January. We have reasonably good quality silage and we're giving them concentrates now for the past 3 weeks. We're starting a small amount of concentrates. The particular type of sheep we have, the hill type sheep, I don't know. Giving them a lot of concentrates, we would have had a lot of trouble with prolapse in the past. So I think I keep it kind of to a minimum really with the concentrates. The twins and the triplets, when we move them to the area of the farms that we've 2 different farms waste here at the moment. We're currently it's the organic feed, 60% protein we're feeding, but we're going to get in some soya to mix in. I think I'll need about 300 or 400 kilos there to mix in with the 16% protein organic nut to boost the milk. So
so you're talking about giving probably 100 grams per lamb carried there for the last 2 to 3 weeks of lamb. Is that what you're thinking?
Exactly. Yeah.
Just in relation to the feed, then, you're sourcing your feed from. Who are you sourcing your feed from at the moment?
Well, originally I bought my first organic feed from Kieran, as one of the merchants there locally. It's a 16% protein nut, and I recently got a larger amount there, a few pallets there from Smith's, and again it's a 16% protein, and there is soya in it. But I will have to add some soya to it for the twins and triplets.
Barry, can you give us an idea there just how long you feed the ration for coming up to lambing, and maybe do you feed the ration for a while after lambing as well? And maybe just is there different feed rates for your singles and twins and triplets that you're feeding at the moment?
Yeah, well, I suppose we scan usually around the 20th of January, whatever, to lamb down, and then the March. So we usually start feeding silage, and this year we were feeding the silage and the organic licks, the Crystal X licks, to the ewes. The concentrates, we've only started feeding them I'd say this last 3 weeks we're feeding them. The singles are getting 0.2 of a kg per head, and the twins and triplets are getting 0.5 of a kg. I'm currently buying the 16% protein nut. I was buying some of Kieran's from a local merchant, and now I bought a larger quantity there, a few pallets of the 16% protein nut from Smith's Feed. We'll be moving all our ewes to waste ground around the 24th, 25th of March, just on the verge of lambing. We won't be feeding them silage or hay, and we'll be increasing the feed at that stage, mainly for the twins and triplets. I'd say we'll be moving from half a kilo to 0.6 or 0.7 a kilo, but we'll also be adding some soya meal into that, about 100 grams per lamb per head of ewe or whatever. So we'll have to buy in some soybean to mix in with the feed, but we will be increasing the feed, and we will be. Look, we're North Leeds from here. It all depends on what weather comes, but we'll be feeding up until the end of April, I suppose, until grass comes. We probably we're as I said earlier, we're understocked this year, and we'll probably have to reduce the stock more, because in relation to organics, no fertilizer, so we'll probably sell some ewes and lambs at foot or whatever, because obviously the trade isn't good at the moment, and I suppose it's probably the best way to get the best price really for your sheep.
Really, you're talking about feeding for 6 to 8 weeks pre-lambing, and maybe 3 to 4 weeks post-lambing, then you're
yes.
with a bit of ration there too.
But again, it all depends on weather. If we get the ideal weather, it's fine, but as you know yourself, there's a lot of uncertainties with weather on the northwest.
So just in relation to minerals, Barry, did you look at that when you were doing your conversion plan, and have you that included in your plan going forward?
I have, because my vet, he has recommended, and he has it included in the conversion plan, the importance of giving minerals. So we will have to give minerals, some of the mineral lick buckets.
So Barry, can you just give us an idea? I suppose you're feeding the ewe for the last 8 weeks, and maybe for a wee while after lambing. What's your thinking as to why you introduce concentrate feed for that period of time?
Well, I think it's very important, because it's for the development of the lamb, and keep the condition of the ewe up, because you'll end up with nothing if you don't feed concentrates. You just have to, for lamb development. It's very important. It's very important.
You'd place a big emphasis on having good quality colostrum and plenty of milk in your ewes after the lamb.
Certainly, and that's why I'm currently looking for soya to mix with the feed. So because I have encountered that it's not just as straightforward to get a good organic feed. Some suppliers have it in stock and others don't. So I will be looking now in the next week or so just for delivery of a half a ton of soya to mix with the feed, because it is very important.
Okay, thank you very much. A very good overview there from Barry. And what I would say to you is just put your questions into the chat function and just say who your question is for. Now I'm going to hand you over to Michael Gottstein, head of the Teagasc Sheep Programme. And what Michael is going to do is maybe give us an overview of the nutritional requirements of the ewe pre-lambing and post-lambing and when you should start feeding. So over to you, Michael.
Okay, Elaine, can you see my screen there?
Yes,
my
perfect.
presentation?
Yes,
Yeah.
everything's spot on. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Very good. Okay, so yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. As Elaine said, my name is Michael Gottstein. I'm head of our sheep knowledge transfer program, and I'd like to thank the organic team for inviting me on to talk a little bit about sheep nutrition. So look at just a few slides maybe. I'm going to cover a little bit on the nutritional requirements, in particular the feeding start date. And I think, we just heard there, about a farmer who's really started feeding early, and that's very, very important. In particular this year, because I think on a lot of farms, ewes would possibly be in poorer than normal body condition because we had a very wet back end last year. And then look at just a few summary points as well. So look at just maybe a little bit of explanation as to why it's important to feed sheep. And this is just a slide or a graph that we got, or diagram we got from Eblex in the UK, and it just shows there really the growth rate of the lamb as pregnancy progresses. So we can see the first kind of 3 weeks of pregnancy, there's virtually, very, very tiny, nothing much happening. Again, once we get into the mid-pregnancy period, up to about 3 months, not an awful lot happening there, a little bit of lamb growth, but really, very, very small, less than half a kilo. And it's basically in the last kind of 6-7 weeks that we see a rapid growth in the fetus. And that's when the nutrition needs need to rise rapidly. And for most farms, that's what's happening at the moment. Farms that are going to be lambing from St. Patrick's Day onwards, that I suppose that's happening at the moment and has been happening for the last number of weeks. And I suppose where that's a little bit gets a little bit complicated is that as that increase in nutrition is required, we have a lamb, as you can see here again, a diagram from Eblex. Week 12, you can see there we have the rumen. So that's basically the big stomach where all the digestion happens on the left hand side there, and you have the little fetus. And week 12, not much happening there in terms of the fetus is relatively small in the uterus, and the yolk can eat away happy out there, nothing restricting her intake. I suppose as the lamb gets bigger and bigger, we can see, in particularly in the case of twins and triplets, that it starts impacting on the ewe's ability to eat. I think often the level to which that happens might be a little bit over exaggerated. But certainly once we start dumping concentrate feed into ewes, their ability to digest forage starts to reduce rapidly. And look at, I suppose, when we talk about energy requirements in sheep, we use the UFL system for categorizing the amount of energy in a feed, and 1 UFL is basically the amount of energy that you would find in a kilo of air dry barley. So what you can see here on the left hand side, a dry ewe needs about 0.8 of a UFL. So roughly about the amount of energy that you would find in 0.8 of a kilo of barley. That's an equivalent energy. And the same in early and mid pregnancy, energy doesn't really increase much. But then as we start coming into late pregnancy, so 6 weeks before lambing, we can see this 70 kilo ewe here with twin lambs, 0.9 of a UFL increasing to 1.1, roughly up to 1.4 UFLs. And really, these figures are showing that even at those, we're assuming about a third of a body condition score loss. So the ewe is also mobilizing her own body condition at that stage. Obviously, she needs to have it to be able to do that, because generally what we see with ewes at that stage is that they're not able to eat enough, in particular forage anyway, at that stage. And that's where the meal comes in and why the meal becomes very important. So what we're saying really is that as we have increasing demands, from the lamb's growth point of view, and the ewes need to basically produce colostrum and bag down, the intake capacity is declining, and by and large silage alone, unless it's exceptionally good quality silage, is going to be insufficient, and concentrates are needed. And even with really good quality silage, we'd still be looking for some DUP going in there, some additional protein, like just basically to get us really good quality colostrum. After lambing, then you can see that it really goes up really quickly here, up to about 2.5 UFLs in the first 6 weeks post lambing. So the ewe's energy requirement increases, obviously, because she's lactating at that stage. She's producing milk to feed her 2 lambs. But what's happening at that stage then, really, once we start getting to kind of 4, 5, 6, 7 weeks of age, the ewe is basically, her intake, her ability to eat goes up, and also hopefully at that stage she'll be eating a lot of very good quality grass, and that'll help her to meet those requirements. In terms of protein, look at again during the dry period, very little protein required. Same with the first 15 weeks of gestation. They're 130 grams a day, so most of your silage roughage feeding will deliver what protein is required. But then once we get into the last 4 weeks, we need kind of somewhere around 214. We say kind of 200 grams for short. And that's, I suppose, where it becomes important. Not just the type of the quantity of protein that's important, but also the type of protein. There's 2 types of protein. So we have what's called rumen degradable protein, and rumen degradable protein is basically protein that is digested by the bugs in the rumen. So the sheep actually doesn't eat that protein itself. It's the bugs in the stomach that eat it, and then the sheep eat the microbial proteins and the byproducts of those bugs. And that's fine for and the sheep will need some of that in order to help her to digest her food. But what we really want quite a bit of, in particular in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is this digestible undegradable protein, or DUP. And that is basically often called bypass protein or rumen undegradable protein. And it's basically a protein source which is digestible to the sheep itself in its intestines, but not available for the bugs in the stomach. So this is protein that basically makes its way through the rumen, is not digested by the bugs, and is digested by the animal in further down the digestive tract, in the same way that we humans would be digesting protein. And the best source, I suppose, of that type of protein that we have is soybean meal. And I know that that's expensive, but we're not talking about putting an awful lot in there. Roughly around 100 grams per day per lamb carried. So if a ewe with twins, we'd be aiming for about 200 grams of soybean meal in the ration for the last kind of 2 weeks. So it's for a short period of time, but very important in terms of meeting the requirements for this undegradable protein that the ewe can basically digest further down the tract. So look at this is again just showing the energy requirements here. So here we have got the we'll say weeks pre-lambing, so 6 weeks. 8 weeks, 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, and then lambing time. And you can see here's the energy requirement going from kind of 0.8 of a UFL up to 1.4. And here's roughly what we're measuring in terms of dry matter intake on silage diets, and you can see it's dropping. And look at a lot of that. The reason why that's dropping is okay. Number one, I suppose there's a bit of space being taken up by the lambs, but also we're putting a good bit of starch in terms of concentrate feed into ewes at that stage, and then basically it reduces their ability to digest the forage. So look at, I've mentioned some of this here. Crude protein requirements 200 grams roughly, ballpark. For bigger ewes, we need to increase. Obviously, I'm talking about a 70 kilo ewe here, so that's a lowland ewe. Hill ewes would probably be around 55 kilos. We'd be talking about a little bit less, maybe 70% of the rates I'm talking about. If somebody had really big kind of, Suffolk Texel Cross lowland ewes that were up on 85 kilos, they'd need to increase the allowances there somewhat to take account for the bigger ewe type. So look at the other thing, I suppose, then when we talk about intake is okay, the number of lambs, the amount of meal they're getting, but also, the quality of the silage. And what we generally say is typically yos are incapable of eating more than 5 kilograms of fresh weight silage. So really, I suppose your intake on the sheep is affected very much by the silage quality. So the higher the dry matter digestibility, the more they're likely to eat, because the quicker it'll go through the digestive tract. And also the higher the intake characteristic is. So if the silage has a very good intake characteristic in terms of that the sheep like the taste of it, that it's well preserved, doesn't have a very low pH or doesn't have a very high pH, and is relatively dry. Chop length also makes a big difference. So if the silage is precision chopped, they'll eat more of it than if it's long baled silage or so chopping it helps. But also the feeding method. So the access to the feeding, and you can see that picture at the bottom of my slide there, where there's an awful lot of silage there in the middle of the feed passage, but not a lot of silage in front of the sheep. So sheep will generally sort through the silage and eat the leavier material first. So the length of time we leave the material there and force them to eat that stemmier material, we slow down their intake, reduce their intake, but also force them to eat lower quality stuff. So by maybe removing the refusals more frequently, we can actually increase the feeding value of the silage or the forage that's available to the sheep. The same for hay. In particular, I suppose if we're feeding hay on a barrier like that, it's very important to keep it shoved in several times a day, because silage is quite heavy and the sheep can't really nose it out and away from the barrier, but hay is very light, and what you'll find is the sheep, as they're sorting through it, tend to nose it out and push it out of their reach. So pushing it in multiple times per day is very important with those kind of linear type feed barriers if we're feeding hay or very dry haylage. This is a slide that we've on the go for a long time. A lot of people might have seen this. It's a traffic light system for rating your feed. How good is your feed? So when we're buying a feed, and then I'll be showing you later on kind of some of the parameters we'd want to look for. And what you'll see on the label is crude protein, crude oil, crude fiber, mineral inclusion levels, your feed ingredients in descending order usually. But what you don't get is an energy rating for the product. And really, I suppose the only way that we can guess how good the energy value is of a feed is by looking at the ingredients and the ingredient inclusion rate. And what we've developed here is this kind of traffic light system. So green are, we'd say, the high energy feeds, so your cereals. So those are your things like your maize, barley, oats, wheat, your pulps, citrus and beet pulp, soybean meal, distillers dried grains, peas and beans would be in a lot of organic feeds. Small quantities of molasses can be utilized quite well, and then oil is very high in energy, but you don't want an awful lot of oil in the diet. So small quantities of oil are beneficial. Then in terms of medium energy feeds are things like maize gluten, soya hulls, and rapeseed. So they're quite good ingredients, but I suppose what they are really is they're just that little bit lower. They're about 10 to 15% lower in energy. So they go into the amber box. We're still happy enough to have them, but obviously not at very high inclusion levels or a significant proportion of the ration. And then the low energy ones are things like pollard wheat feed, palm kernel, sunflower oat feed, and cottonseed. And those are generally ingredients that can be quite high in protein, so are often included in rations to increase the protein level of the ration, but they're very low in energy. So these are significantly lower than either the green or the orange ones or the amber ones. So we want to have, very low quantities or none at all, ideally, of those in the ration. So I suppose in terms of our pregnant ewes, if we're looking for what should the ration come in at, roughly a UFL of 0.94 or above. The crude protein really depends on the feeding level and the forage type. Okay, so feeding a 16% or an 18% or a 20% ration really depends on the amount you're going to feed and the type of silage. So if we have a kind of a poor quality hay or a low protein silage that's maybe 8 or 9 or 10 or 11%, and they're only going to get 80 or 90 grams of protein from that, we need to make up the balance. The target here for our 70 kilo ewe is 200 plus grams of crude protein in the last 3 to 4 weeks, and of that we'd be hoping for about 40 grams of this DUP, this digestible rumen undegradable protein. Okay, and that's generally our soybean will be delivering that. Okay, now it is possible, like in the previous video, to top it up with soybean. So you go with maybe a 16% ration, and maybe there's not a lot of soybean in that, and then for the last 2 weeks you just top up with a bit of loose soybean in the ration. Crude fiber, we're generally looking for about 8% or above, and that's just to reduce tummy upsets. Oils there, look, generally the recommendation is to stay below 6%. To be honest with you, I think 6% is probably a little bit high. I'd be saying, probably somewhere around 4%. So there's a lot of oil in the diet. It can coat the fiber and reduce the digestibility of the silage or the forage that you're feeding. Starch and sugar together should be less than 35%, and that's just to avoid getting acidosis. And then generally in a lot of rations, we see a bit of molasses in there to bind the minerals, and a bit of salt as well added often. And look, just be careful with salt. If there's an awful lot of salt in there, the sheep will drink a lot of water, and especially if they're housed on straw bedding, you can have bedding issues there with the excess urine. Very important is to have Cal Mag in the ration, and the Cal Mag is important to be there from the start, really, because it helps to prevent milk fever. By the magnesium is used by the animals in the process of mobilizing calcium from their bones, and it's also important after lambing as a prevention for grass tetany. So generally we'd be saying, buy a ration with Cal Mag for both pre and post lambing feeding to ewes. There, it is beneficial to have it in there. Okay, so look at when to start. I suppose often I think we start too late. And the one challenge there is we have what we call excess body condition loss. Okay, so the ewes, we start feeding too late, ewes start slipping in body condition, and we know that basically where ewes lose body condition or excessive body condition between scanning and lambing time, that has an adverse outcome on their ability to rear their lambs. And there's a lot of research work on that showing that they're less able to milk off their back, and mortality in those lambs from birth to weaning is higher. So we should be trying to avoid excess body condition loss. A small little bit of condition in ewes that have good body condition loss is okay, but I think for an awful lot of ewes this year, we're probably slightly back in body condition, and we should be trying to avoid that. In terms of when to start feeding, it also depends on the forage. So what type of forage you have. So people who are outside on grass maybe, or on forage crops, or have very good silage, they can start a little bit later, and I'll show you a chart on that. But very important is that we feed according to litter size, lambing date, and body condition. So litter size, feed your singles less than your twins, and your triplets more than your twins. Start feeding the later lambing sheep later, because we don't want to feed singles for an extra 4 or 5 weeks just because they're lambing at the end of the lambing season, because we end up with very big lambs and trouble getting them out. But also feed according to body condition score. So any ewe that is thin, a thin single bearing ewe should be fed with your twin so that she gets a bit of extra feed. A thin twin bearing ewe should be put in with your triplets to get the extra bit of grub there as well, to help her to put on a bit of weight between when you start feeding and lambing. And this is a chart, and many people will have seen this before. It's a typical chart we put up. Again, we're talking about our typical 70-kilo ewe in good body condition carrying twins. So this is a ewe that can mobilize a little bit of body condition. And you can see there, if we have really, really good quality silage, 75 DMD silage plus, we'd be starting about 6 weeks out with a very small amount of meal. And then going up, and in total we'd be feeding about 20 kilos of meal. And as the silage decreases in feeding value, you have to start earlier. So you can see here for a kind of a 60 DMD silage, we'd be starting 10 weeks out to feed this twin ewe, so 4 weeks earlier. So the quality of the silage is very, very important. And with poor quality silage, we need to start earlier because we're trying to prevent that body condition score loss. Okay. So look at, I suppose, what am I saying to people? It's very important, I suppose, that we start feeding on time. Okay. Very often people are maybe leaving ewes outside, it's bare, and we're delaying housing them. We need to avoid that excessive body condition score loss. Okay. And the body condition score loss arises because they haven't got sufficient nutrition. Maybe also there's a parasite issue or a lameness issue. So there's flock health issues that are preventing the sheep from getting the nutrition that they need. Or that, for example, there's parasites there that are sucking the good out of them. So look at it's a combination of things, but I think by and large, what we see on a lot of farms is a lot of body condition score loss arises because we don't start feeding early enough. For organic farms, because feed, concentrate feed is so expensive, I would say make very good quality silage. And look, it's too late for people for this year. Obviously, the silage that's there is what's there. But for the coming year, make a plan to try and make really good quality silage, because that reduces your concentrate feed requirement. So very often that just means cutting a little bit earlier. So, maybe people would leave the silage bulk up for, 7 or 8 or 9 weeks and have, a big quantity of pretty ropey material. Better to go in after 5 weeks or 6 weeks and cut a lighter crop, but go in maybe for a second crop, or cut another area of the farm where that's possible. Don't over process your grains. If you're feeding a nut, obviously that's already processed. But where people are feeding kind of blends like cereals and maybe peas and beans, don't over process them. In particularly if you're feeding moderate quality roughage, because if you over process them, in particular the protein grains, they'll be all digested in the rumen, and very little of it will bypass. So let it bypass through the rumen, some of it undigested, and the sheep will digest that in their intestines further down the digestive tract and get more of that kind of DUP from it. Soya is good value. Even at, somebody quoted me €1,600 a ton for organic soya. I would say, you're only feeding a very small amount. You're talking about 100 grams per lamb carried. For most people, we're probably talking about somewhere around 100 or 150 grams on average per ewe per day for a 2-week period. So the amount of soybean you're feeding is kind of somewhere around 3 or 4 kgs per ewe. It's not an awful lot of soybean going in there. And then look at just a lot of mention or we've had a mention of lick buckets in the previous video, and an awful lot of farmers, both organic and non-organic, are feeding lick buckets, and they're very convenient, but they are a very expensive way to supplement sheep. And I would say, unless if you can go and feed sheep in a trough, it's much cheaper than buying a lick bucket and letting them lick away at that, because the amount of benefit that they're going to get from it is probably a lot less than if you were buying an organic ration and giving them the equivalent money amount in a truck. Obviously there's a labor associated with having to feed the sheep in that situation. So yeah, look, that's me done there, Elaine.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that overview. And I'll ask you for any questions for Michael, just to put them into your chat function, and we'll hear back from Michael at the end of the panel's talk. Now, at the start, we headed to North Leitrim for our first video. We're actually heading down the country now, and we're going to head to North Tipperary. And our second farmer that we have here tonight is Amy Jackson. Amy is farming in partnership with her husband, Ross, on an organic farm in Lacca in North Tipperary. They're now well-established organic farmers, farming organically for the past 8 years. On their farm, they have a mixed enterprise. They've got a cereal and sheep enterprise. And I suppose I would have to say the sheep enterprise on the farm is credit to Amy, as Amy has come from a background working with sheep all during her adult life. And hence, when they went into organics, they decided also to add sheep into the equation, into the farming enterprise. Over the years, they're selling all their lamb by 2 markets. They're going to the Irish Country Meats in Camola and Wexford, but also in recent years, Amy has developed her own brand, Lacca Organic Lamb, and is selling it directly to customers. So in mid-February, I caught up with Amy on this video here, and she was just getting ready for lambing, and here she tells our story as regards what her approach is pre and post lambing as regards the ewe's nutrition. Okay, Amy, it's coming to this time of year again when lambing is about to start, so preparation is in full swing. So before we start, you might introduce us here to the flock as we go around the shed here.
Okay, so all our ewes have been scanned, and we have them separated into their different groups based on their expected litter size. So we've the singles here, and any ewe lambs that didn't go in lamb are in there as well. There's just a handful of purebred Galways. And then we have all the twins here in the middle, and I have them separated into 2 groups based on their due date. So these are the earlies and those are the lates, and they're just being fed slightly different amounts. So those are like a week behind these. And these are the twin ewes and the single ewe lambs in there as well. And then up in the far corner we have the triplets. So they're triplet bearing ewes and twin bearing ewe lambs.
Yeah, and maybe just, we're in the second week of February, so these have just come in this week.
Yeah, I kept them out as long as possible, really just depending on how good the ground is. And then we've got to a point where all the twins needed to be fed. So that would be quite a big deal if they were outside with troughs. So it's just handier at this stage for us to have them in the shed. And now that the triplets have been getting fed for maybe 4 weeks already. And the twins have just started getting fed a week or so ago. So
Yeah, and maybe just following on from that, like you said, you started feeding the triplets. So what kind of, I suppose we'll look at first, what kind of feeding rates, what way are you introducing the feed? And are you upping it as you go along maybe?
that's it, yeah. Yeah, so just in terms of, I suppose, energy requirements in the run up to lambing is why we would increase the feed from a small amount initially up until the maximum amount when they're due their lambs. So the triplets, obviously they have a higher energy requirement and protein as well. So they would start being fed 9 weeks out from lambing, and we're starting them on 0.3 of a kilo per head, and they slowly build up all the way until 0.9 of a kilo per head. And then the twins, they would start being fed a couple of weeks after that, so 6 weeks before lambing, and they are started on 0.3 of a kilo per head as well, and they are built up to 0.6 of a kilo per head per day. And then the singles, they're only fed for the 2 weeks before they're due, and they're on 0.3 of a kilo the whole time. Now, there's a little bit of variation in what one farmer might do to the next, and like factors that we would be taking into account are silage quality. So we've got red clover
This
silage.
is the red clover silage here that's in front of them at the moment.
Yeah, and that'd be about 16% protein. So, they are getting a good bit of protein from that in the early days. And then our regular silage would be good quality, 70-75% DMD.
So you're aiming for good quality silage is
Well, you just would
definitely a big part
adjust
of
your
diet,
meal
yes.
supplementation based on the quality. So if you've not such good quality silage, if you've a lower DMD, maybe 60, then you might add 0.1 of a kilo per head. Or if you're going down to less than that, you might add a little bit more as well in the meal supplementation. So
Yeah, and that leads on to, like, in an organic situation, you're looking in where you have to buy in organic feeds.
Yes.
So again, looking at that in an organic situation, what options, or what have you were organic now since your
2015 we went
to
in to conversion and 17 certified.
So you have 5 years under your belt feeding at Lamington, and I suppose with a lot of the people that have gone in at the moment,
Yes.
we're getting a lot of questions in relation to the diet. So maybe you might talk us through what options because you've done a lot.
We've tried a few different things.
Yes.
Yeah. The first year that we were in organic, I was a little bit apprehensive, I suppose, about mixing our own ration. So we used a bought-in nut. It was in small bags. It was lovely to use, very convenient, easy to handle and everything, and no mess and no dust or anything like that. But that was very expensive. So we moved away from that the second year, and we mixed straights that year. But there was quite a lot of work in the mixing, and it was, dusty enough. I suppose we were kind of amateurs at it as well. So the year after that, and up until now, we bought in a ready mixed ration just in 1 ton bags. We maybe buy 3.5 or 4 tons for the whole of the season. We can just top it up as we need to. But that's fairly expensive this year, so we've looked at alternatives, and we have a supply of our own organic oats from the farm. So we're going to use those and buy in organic soya and buy in organic peas. And I've worked out the 2 different mixes, so like an oats and soya mix and an oats and pea mix, and how many oats do I need to add to my 1 ton of peas, and how many oats do I need to add to my 1 ton of soya to make it up. And we can end up with about 6 tons of mix, having bought in the 1 ton of soya and the 1 ton of peas. And that's working out at around €800 cheaper than buying in 6 tons of ready-made ration.
And your 6 tons, maybe we didn't say it at the start, what lambings are you going to have? That's feeding how many ewes and lambs that
There
are going to
are
lamb?
157 ewes in the shed.
Yeah.
and the scanning rate was a little bit low this year, 1.68 or something lambs out of that.
What happens post lambing then? You're feeding. We've gone through
post lambing. Yeah. Once the ewes have lambed, we would be adding in some Cathal into the ration. We would otherwise have problems with grass tetany. So any ewe that's lambed, she's still getting meal, and she'd have the Cathal mixed in. We keep the ewes in an individual pen probably for, well, until the navel's dry on the lamb anyway, and then just on a case-by-case basis, but maybe 2 days, 1 or 2 days, depending on how busy we are and how under pressure we are. And then they move into a creche in here. So like these are all due in the first week of lambing. So very quickly this whole area will be empty.
Yes.
And we'll be able to use this as a creche for ewes and lambs.
Yes.
Depends a little bit on the breed then, how quickly they're moved out of the shed. If they have a decent woolly head on them, they'll go out a lot earlier than like the Rouge cross lambs would be very, very bald when they come out. And they're very susceptible to bad weather conditions. So I'd keep them in a good bit longer, you know, maybe a week or 10 days.
Right, so when are you starting lambing now?
We're starting lambing on the 9th of March.
And how long does lambing, how long is that? Is it
I'd love to
is it
say,
quick?
I'd
Is
love
it
to say
compact?
4 weeks. We
Yes.
have managed 4 weeks once,
Right.
and it was great. But we lamb ewe lambs as well as ewes, and look, we're kind of aiming for most of the ewes to lamb in March. The ewe lambs wouldn't be really mature enough to be lambing down at the same time, because they're our own replacements as well that we've kept. So they're all March, April born, the replacements. So that stretches things out for us a little bit, and we'd probably be looking at 6 weeks plus for the lambing time, do you know. But
The majority is done though in you would say.
well, all the ewes,
Yes.
the ewes will be done pretty much in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Do you know, like they'll be going.
So it's
we'll
full
go through
on.
the ewes very, very fast.
Yeah.
And then we'll just have the ewe lambs in. Yeah.
And then so you're talking about in approximately 2 weeks in before they're out. Of course, it's weather dependent, etc. But that would be what the plan would be. To have them.
Depending on the breed. Like
Yes.
I'm all for having them out as
Quick,
quick as possible.
Yeah.
But just last year was the first year that we had the Rouge lambs, and like we had to be bringing a few back in. So I'd rather have them good and strong going out for that. And they would be fed when they're outdoors as well.
Yes. What
So-
would you be? How long are you feeding them then when they go?
About 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So we might have, ideally, we'd have them in groups based on age. So, you know, we'd fill up one paddock first and then move to another paddock. And, you know, it just means young lambs aren't being put in with older lambs and ewes, and,
So you're
you know, keeping
like
the fields clean as
Similar
well.
to here, you're batching them as well as
Yeah.
according as they're lambing. You're not just opening the gate and letting them all out. You have work done batching them to
Yeah,
get them out.
ideally,
Yes.
ideally.
Yeah.
And like we have temporary electric fencing as well, so that makes it easier for us to do that. We can partition the fields and have them in smaller groups. And I probably do that until the lambs have had their vaccines, because it means I can get in a group then, you know, as soon as they're 3 weeks old, they're due a vaccine, and then 4 to 6 weeks after that they'd get their second shot. So if I keep them in groups by age, it means I can bring in a handy number of sheep, do all their vaccines as early as possible and get them back out. If I leave them all together in one group and they're lambing over a 6 or 8 week period, by the time the youngest lambs are 3 weeks old, the oldest lambs are 13, 14 weeks old.
Yeah.
So it just makes sense from that point of view as well.
Yourself and Ross have introduced a number of herbal lays, so
Yeah.
they're actually, that's another, I suppose, something different that you're doing as well, is that they're going out. What kind of pastures are they going out to then? They're going out to graze.
Okay. So they'll go out onto chicory and plantain grassland mixes with some white clover in. I know that there were 16 different species sown in our multi-species swards, but if you go out and have a look at the fields, you'll see it's mainly grasses, white clover, chicory and plantain, and the lambs do thrive on the chicory and the plantain, and it's bringing up key vitamins and minerals for them as well. It's helping reduce the worm burden in them, or helping them be resistant to worms. So yeah, that's well suited to an organic situation.
What advice would you give to somebody in relation to now in organics, or thinking about converting to organics, in relation to getting ready for lambing as regards feeding and post-lamb?
Okay, so feeding, feed costs are very high. So you want to be feeding accurately. So you want to scan your ewes, definitely. and that's going to help reduce problems at lambing time as well. If you're feeding your ewes adequately, then you're going to help reduce the chances of twin lamb disease. You're going to have better quality colostrum. You'll have less illness in your lambs, and all of that means less treatments. So that's you don't want to be spending money on treatments, and you don't want to be having to mind withdrawals and all that kind of thing as well. And then if you're looking to save as much money as possible on the feed, have as best quality silage as you can. If you can have red clover silage, that's getting protein into them, additional protein into them early on. And then, we all know grass is the cheapest feed, so good quality silage, and that reduces slightly the amount of meal you'd have to supplement with. And to mix your own ration if you can, get some organic. What we're doing here, we have tried lots of different things. So we tried the nuts, we've bought in ready mixed rations, and we've mixed our own ration. And it is the cheapest option to buy, say, whole oats.
Yeah, what you're saying, you need to look at your own. You've tweaked it to what suits your system, but there's no template there. But you're saying good quality silage is definitely
good quality
start,
silage,
and then see how you supplement.
How you supplement, and to not really be afraid of mixing your own. Like they do fine on just oats and soya.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Amy. And I should say thank you to myself as well for that interview there. I'm going to hand you over now to my colleague, Cathal McCauley. Cathal is an organic advisor based in our Teagasc office in Manor Hamilton. And Cathal is going to give us a kind of an whistle-stop tour as an organic farmer, what you need to be looking at in relation to organic feed and mineral supplementation. So it's slightly different now when you are an organic farmer. So over to you, Cathal.
That's great, Elaine. Thank you. Can you see that? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, so that's great. So as Elaine said, I'm Cathal McCauley. I'm an organic advisor based in Manorhampton, County Leitrim, and I'm covering the 3 counties of Sligo, Leitrim, and Donegal as an organic advisor. So look, I'm just going to take a quick run through the organic regulations in relation to both feed and minerals in an organic situation. So just to look at the feed regulations, and I suppose look at these 2 points are taken directly from the organic standards, and the first is at least 60% of the dry matter in daily rations shall consist of roughage, fresh or dried fodder or silage. So that's basically saying that the 60% of the diet must come from some kind of grass or roughage material, whether that's in a bale or it's out on pasture. And just, I suppose, important point to note there as well is that the 60% rule is post-weaning, so therefore it does not apply to diets for calves and lambs until they're weaned. So whatever the feed arrangement is up to weaning is okay, but once your lambs are weaned, then that 60% rule applies. So just to look then at our organic feed, and I suppose once we convert into an organic system, or think of converting into an organic system, you probably all have heard at this stage that your feed must be organic certified to start off, and I suppose secondly, which is important if you're sourcing feed from other farms or from tillage farmers, that it's GM free, and I suppose that's probably important in relation to mineral lick buckets as well. To make sure that the ingredients in lick buckets are GM free. Just to say on that, if a product is certified organic, then that means it's already certified as GM free. It will not be certified as an organic product if it's not GM free. So just to take a look maybe at sourcing feed, and it was probably touched on there in the video, the previous video. So I suppose essentially you have 3 options. You buy from a mill, which is an option there. You buy direct from a tillage farmer, or you grow your own feed. So I suppose depending on land type and depending on your own situation, one of these 3 options may suit. And as you've seen in the previous previous video, you may be able to combine two of these options to make it suit your farm best. And I suppose to develop a ration that's the best quality possible for the needs of your particular flock. So just to look then at some of the feed records that need to be kept, and maybe just to go back a step here, I suppose if you look at point 2 here, if you're sourcing direct from a tillage farmer, one of the important records to keep there is that you must have a copy of the organic license from that farmer. The same as if you're buying livestock of another organic farmer, you must get a copy of that organic license. Feed purchase records then, so for newly converted, this will be old news for anyone that's in organics for a period of time. But for newly converted farmers, there's a feed purchase records as part of your organic records book, and that will be, we'll say, the date of purchase, the quantity purchased, and maybe a few other details, batch numbers and things like that have to be written into your book. It's good practice, and I know the organic certification bodies like to see that there's a label kept off each of the batch of each batch of feed that you buy. So keep a label off, pull a label off a bag if you're buying in bags, and just keep that on record. And of course, keeping the invoices is important there for inspection. As you know, you'll be inspected, and these records will be checked on a yearly basis. So mineral supplementation on organic farms. So and I suppose there is regulations around this, and I suppose mineral deficiency must be identified within the animal health plan as one of the most important things for supplementing minerals on an organic farm. So I just pull that. So, and I suppose again, if you are treating with minerals, whether that's through licks or any other source, the treatments must be justified, and there's 4 forms of justification that are accepted. One being forage analysis, so you get a forage analysis done on your silage or test your grass if you like, and if that shows that you need to supplement with minerals, then that is allowable. Again, a blood analysis is allowed there. So if you take a blood sample from any of the sheep and it's shown that there's a lack in minerals, then that will justify a treatment with some sort of minerals. Soil analysis again. So if you take a soil analysis and it's shown that you're in a, if there's, for example, if there's a cobalt deficiency there, then that's going to allow for coming in there with a cobalt drench or some sort of cobalt lick or whatever may be suitable. And again, if there's a known deficiency of cobalt or selenium or whatever it may be on the farm, a letter from your vet that has experience on your farm stating that is also another form of justification. So just to say, and as I said before about the GM-free, a straight mineral licks are allowed as long as they're GM-free. So GM-free mineral licks are permitted. Mineral licks containing molasses can be used, but you must have prior approval by your OCB. So generally the licks won't contain molasses, but if there is a reason there that you have to use molasses-based licks, you need to get approval from your organic certification body first before you use them. And I suppose that's an important point there. Just for anything in relation to organics, you make sure you get approval from your OCB first before you actually go and do anything. So mineral supplementation, yeah, again, so as I said, their mineral drenches are allowed and mineral boluses are allowed, but as we touched on the previous slide, both must be justified if you are going down that route. So just to look at the mineral supplementation then on the animal health plan. So it's important, as I said, that it's included on the animal health plan, and this is just an example from the Irish Organic Association Animal Health Plan. And as you see in the yellow box down at the bottom, so are there known mineral deficiencies on your holding? And if there is, you will be ticking yes, and you'll be given details. So in this case, it's known cobalt and selenium deficiency, and there's going to be use of cobalt B12 drench and a mineral lick bucket to supplement minerals. Okay, so it's relatively straightforward, and the justification for that then will be in the letter from the vet in this case, which will also go in as part of the animal health plan. And just to show for the organic trust contingent as well, that just there's a wee bit of a difference between the two plans. So in this case, you have your species type, which is sheep in this case. And again, it's cobalt, copper, and selenium deficiency is the problem, which is the mineral deficiency. Suggestions for managing the problem organically. So the use of organic mineral lick buckets where possible in this case. And then veterinary inputs, so mineral bolus and the use of mineral licks. And again, so see the vet letter for details. So that it's justified through the vet letter. So I suppose just to finish off with an important point. So if you're in doubt, remember to always consult your organic certification body before purchasing any feed or minerals. So if you're in doubt, the OCBs are there to help and are very good at helping out farmers and advisors. So if you're in doubt, just lift the phone and give them a ring and they will help you out. And thanks very much for listening. And if you have any queries on any of the slides, stick them into the chat box and I have no problem answering them. So I'll pass back to you, Elaine.
Okay, Cathal, thank you very much. And as Cathal says, keep putting your questions and answers into your questions. We'll give the answers to your questions into the question and answer function. So I'll get you to stop sharing there, Cathal, and I'll bring everybody, if all our panelists come live now and turn on their cameras, and we'll start looking at the questions. And I'm joined also there with Joe, who's also going to help with the questions. Maybe I just start off, maybe Barry, asking you a question. I know you're only 3 months in, but do you see yourself maybe changing the way you're feeding? Have you seen maybe something that you might even do different next year, even though you're only into this year's lambing? Any changes that you are really, thinking, yes, I'll do differently next year?
Yes, Elaine. Obviously, we're going to have the plan as to where we can buy the feeding a wee bit more cheaper. And I suppose it was, I know Cathal had mentioned to me previously that we should be going direct to some of the tillage farmers when they're harvesting at the end of August or mid-August or whatever. We're also looking at the option of, we would have some off the better ground, we have some limestone ground there. We may stitch some red clover. We're going to look at that as well in the summertime. So just maybe to reduce the costs of feeding. I suppose it's important too, maybe just to, and it's something we wouldn't have put much emphasis on, is testing just the quality of our silage. One thing, assuming we have good quality silage, but we mightn't have, but they seem to be doing it fine on it, but obviously we need to get the quality, we need to get the silage tested. So basically, I suppose the organics is all new to me, but look at, I suppose we need to plan around buying the organic feeds from some of the mills at the moment in the bags isn't an option. It's very expensive. Like when you're paying €20 a bag, it's expensive.
Yes. Yeah.
So we need to try and keep down that cost.
Okay, but all right, thank you for that. Michael, over to you. Just somebody said, what's the alternative for soy for protein? As you know yourself, and you mentioned it, and from all the speakers, it's been mentioned that our organic soy is not overly viable or sustainable. So what other options would you feel that you could go from Irish grown cereal crops for protein? Would you have any?
Yeah, so look at Elaine. I suppose that there's two things. That one is the amount of protein, so the 200 grams of crude protein, and that can really come from, some of that will come from your silage, and there will be certain proportions of rumen bypass protein in all feeds, but I suppose the best source of DUP in the past would have been fish meal. Now we can't feed fish meal anymore for a long time. The next best is something like bypass soya. So that's a soybean that's been treated to help it to bypass, and I assume that's not available in an organic format. The next best source then is soybean meal. And after that, then you're on, some, maybe treated rape. So there's bypass rape. Again, it's rape that's generally heat treated. And then there's all the other protein sources, and then have a percentage. Like, so look at, I before the meeting here now today, I would have just looked it up, and say peas and beans have a percentage of bypass protein of this DUP, but it's about a third of that what's in soybeans. So it's very hard to get to that 40 grams of DUP for the twins, like, to maximize your colostrum yield. And that's the challenge, I suppose. It's very easy to get to the 200 grams of protein for the twin bearing ewe. You'll do that with a combination of your silage. In Amy's case, where she has red clover silage, which is highly digestible and high in protein, she'll probably get there very, very easily. Amy and Ross together, they'll have no bother hitting the 200 grams. The challenge on an organic farm will be hitting the DUP spec. And that's a challenge that we find even in commercial farms. We have a lot of commercial farmers out there who are feeding a 16, 17, 18, 19, 20% protein ration, and they're not hitting the DUP. They're still going in with the soybean on top of it, like, because there just isn't enough soybean in the ration, or they're not feeding enough of it to get that 100 grams per lamb carried. And I suppose the argument there is, what's the payoff? The payoff is, look at the ewes lamb down with 200 grams of protein. The colostrum quality won't be as good, is likely not to be as good, and then potentially you have issues with lambs in terms of lamb survival and their ability to fight off disease, and so that's where it's at. I mean, on the conventional side of the house, we've been pushing soya for a number of years, and we've been pushing that in tandem with reducing the use of prophylactic antibiotics for the prevention of watery mouth and joint ill and things like that. So the farmers really concentrate on colostrum quality and getting it into the lambs, and then basically don't use prophylactically antibiotics to prevent disease. That we're hoping that the colostrum will do that, and I suppose that's important on an organic farm as well. So look at the higher the throughput of the feed, so the higher the digestibility of the feed, the quicker it moves through, and the less time that the bugs have got to digest it in the rumen. So if you have really high quality grass silage like 75-80 DMD grass silage, or red clover silage that's really high quality and it's moving through pretty quickly, the DUP level of the protein that you're feeding, whatever the source is, will increase because it's spending less time in the rumen and traveling through. The challenge is where we don't have good quality silage, where we have poor quality silage, 55, 60, 65 DMD, a lot of stemmy material going in. And basically that's very slow moving through the stomach, and the concentrate gets caught up inside that system, and then it's digested by the bugs, and you get very little protein coming out that's non-microbial protein. So that's a challenge. Unfortunately, I don't have a magic bullet for you, unless we're going to start heat treating rape, organic rape in Ireland. That's probably the next best source. But I mean, I wonder, is there enough of a demand for that type of a product for that to happen?
Okay, Michael, thank you. Just a comment maybe you might take up on there, Amy, just was making the comment that we have a lot of emphasis on soybean, but just to clarify, the soybean that you're using is organic GM-free soybean that you're using?
Yeah, it's certified organic, GM-free. It's from Irish Organic Feeds. So yeah. No,
and so maybe just to quantify, like you were saying, your flock is 100 and how much soybean then, just to give it people, and Michael mentioned that this 200 grams, how much soybean are you purchasing for the flock for your lambing season?
Yeah. So I calculated the ration knowing that we were going to buy 1 ton of soya and 1 ton of peas. So that's made 6.1 tons of meal. So you're looking about 4 tons of oats from our farm, organic oats, plus the 1 ton organic soya and the 1 ton.
And approximately how much is that costing you this year, the soya?
The soya is 16.50.
Yeah.
Per ton.
Just so per ton. Okay. Thank you, Amy. And maybe just a question back to you, Michael, can you feed, very simply, can you feed whole peas?
Yeah, so sheep are very good at digesting all whole cereals and whole grains, and I suppose the proviso on that is if you have very high quality grass silage or red clover silage, and it's going in and out through the system very quickly. It can carry them through. And look at, if somebody's worried about that, is just have a look at what's coming out the back end of the sheep. Very often you'll see a whole grain and you'll say, oh my God, look, we need to start rolling and crushing this. But when you squeeze the little grain, you'll find that there's nothing inside and only moisture. It's basically the hull that has come out. But sheep, by and large, are very good at handling a proportion of whole grains. And in Amy and Ross's case, where they have very high quality grass or clover silage going in there, maybe slightly processing it, so cracking it or cracking a proportion of it and just keeping an eye on it would be beneficial there if you're worried about some of it coming through. But you'll see it coming through in the dung. And you can check it and see, is it hollowed out grains where the starch and stuff has been absorbed out of it, or is it stuff that's actually bypassing and getting through and not being digested, in which case you just crack it.
And what's the story next? Back to you again, Michael, just in relation to beans. Should they roll beans or will they eat beans?
Same story.
Yes.
Because it really depends on your forage. So if you've got a real stemmy ropey forage, 65, 60 DMD stuff, there's probably a benefit in putting an awful lot of stuff in there whole, so that it basically can get through the system and be digested in the intestine by the sheep without the bugs having really taken everything out of it. Whereas if you had really high quality silage, then you could look at cracking a proportion of it.
And maybe just, Cathal, question for you. You were talking about feed buckets. Are there non-GM feed buckets available, and where would one source them, Cathal?
Yes, so yeah, they're available, and probably look at a lot of local merchants are stocking them at this stage. So look at, there's various different manufacturers, and there's no one better than the other. But if you go to your merchant, then generally they'll source them or have them in stock. Most merchants probably have them at this stage, I would say.
Okay. There's a few more questions there, Joe. Will you take some of the questions there coming in?
Yeah, there's one there maybe for Amy. If you put out a CalMag bucket to try avoid milk fever, how soon before lambing would you advise?
Oh God, I think Michael might be better to answer this. I noticed Michael was saying that the CalMag powder should be in the feed the whole time. That's a bit different to what we've been doing, so I might adjust that. And we give them access to high mag buckets once they're in the creche, and we'd have a high mag bucket in the field as well. But I think my husband actually has a question in for Michael about that as well. So we're learning while we're here this evening as well.
Michael, we'll throw the same question across to you there.
Yeah, okay. So look at I think a lot of people think that CalMag is basically a material that contains calcium and magnesium, and it's not. It's a material that just contains magnesium. It's magnesium on its own. There's no calcium in there. It's calcined magnesite that's in it rather than anything to do with calcium. And magnesium is important in basically the pathway for the sheep to be able to break down its bones, and that's what happens to the ewes as they come close to lambing. They can't get enough calcium from their diet initially, so they need to break down their bones and mobilize some of the reserves. And the calcium is important in that metabolism. Don't ask me exactly how that works, Joe, but anyway, that's what the vets tell us anyway. So look at having CalMag in there before lambing down is useful. There are some veterinary people who suggest that it's also useful in terms of reducing the incidence of prolapse. So we would advocate the use of CalMag in late pregnancy as well as post lambing for grass tetany control. And the other thing I would just say on that, in terms of buckets, and look at buckets are fine outside. But just be careful with feeding mineral buckets or licks to sheep indoors, because they tend to lick them out of boredom, and there's a lot of work done on that in the past in UCD with Frank Crosby, where basically they found that they overate buckets just out of boredom. They stood there licking them, and that overeating of minerals can have a deleterious effect, or a negative effect on the lamb's ability to absorb immunoglobulins after birth, in particular if there was iodine in the bucket, even for short periods of time. So what I would say, while mineral buckets or leak buckets are useful, for sheep outdoors, I'd be slow enough in advocating them for sheep in an indoor system.
Just one very closely linked question there is does Michael believe there is no requirement for licks for indoor fed ewes if the CalMag is in the ration? Can we eliminate the buckets if the CalMag is in the ration?
Look, buckets are a convenient but expensive way of supplementing minerals. So, I mean, like sheep need minerals, and generally, if you're home mixing, you should get we should be getting a mineral mix that basically balances the ration. So we'll be looking at calcium phosphorus ratios and things like that. There'll probably be added salt, maybe limestone flour, things like that. So certainly, I think we would need to have a mineral mix in the ration. I'm not suggesting that if sheep are being fed indoors, they don't need a mineral mix. Most rations should be balanced with a suitable mineral mix. But that's a powder form that's cheap and cheerful, and you're adding maybe 20 or 30 grams per head. Buckets are quite expensive, and there's an awful lot of people spending a lot of money on buckets. And while they have a convenience aspect to them, it's a very expensive way of supplementing sheep.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. And just one call there for you. Just someone is making a comment that soybean meal, I think this person is of the impression that we can't get GM-free soybean meal. What's the situation there, Cathal?
Yeah, so I think Amy probably touched on this already. The soybean meal we're talking about is organic certified and is GM free, so it's fully permitted for organic farmers to use. Yeah, there's no problem there.
Perfect. Elaine, I might head back to you again.
Yeah, just maybe a question here for Amy, just a question, and maybe I'll ask Barry the same question in relation to pet lambs and lamb ewes not having milk. Now, in organics, it's slightly different. You don't have an organic replacer. So what advice would you give to people in relation to that whole area and what's permitted in organics?
Advice, don't have pet lambs.
Yes, yeah. So would you have plan B there if the mother doesn't have milk?
So look, we have some triplets. We have a handful of triplets and we've loads of singles. So we would be aiming to foster on any spare triplet lamb onto a single. And we'd have sort of 3 ways of doing that depending on the situation. And usually it'd be successful. Now, the only time we might end up with a pet lamb is when we're lambing the ewe lambs towards the end and we've limited, like we wouldn't have any ewes that could take a spare lamb. So unless our children want to rear a pet lamb, which we might let them do, and that would mean that the lamb isn't organic anymore, because we would be feeding a non-organic milk replacer. But other than that, we would just sell it.
Yeah. So, and if you do keep it, what you're saying is records have to be kept. It has to be tagged and not sold into the organic market.
We tag. Sorry, Elaine, for crossing over.
No, go ahead. Work away. No.
Yeah, we by choice, I suppose, on our farm, we tag all the lambs as they go out into the field. So they've already got a spray paint number on them, and we can correlate the tag to the spray paint. And if it's been reared as a pet lamb, for example, or if it got any treatments, then that would be against this tag number. So we'd have full traceability that way.
And Barry, pet lambs in North Leitrim? What?
Yeah, we do have pet lambs, and what I did mention, we do have 14 ewes carrying triplets, but we do lamb a good few of the sheep in, and we have a tendency of putting in some of the singles. We would milk some of the ewes that have the bigger elders, milk some of the ewes they have the colostrum or whatever, and we do try and foster over some of the triplets over on the single ewes. They don't all work out, but I do find Dundee is a good spot to get rid of them too, or some of the local farmers. But the pet lambs, no, we're not fond of them. So look, we'll always end up with a few of them. I know there's regulations there around, when you're in organic farming or whatever, and
yes,
that was mentioned to me. But look, we're not lovers of pet lambs, but they are handy to have. But we do have a stock of colostrum. We'd like to keep a stock of colostrum as well.
So you have a plan B there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Maybe back to you, Michael. Just a question there in relation to what is your opinion of forage crops as a way of supplementing ewes before lambing?
Yeah, so look, forage crops are quite good, and generally they're very digestible. They're generally high in protein. I suppose look at it, you probably want to be putting some sort of a long source of forage with it, or a run back onto a grass field, and then just be careful when you're switching over. So generally if we run them on the forage crops too late, too close, and have a big switch to an alternative diet, you can end up with a lot of yolks going down with milk fever, twin lamb disease, close to lambing. So what I'd say is do the switch gradually. If they're staying on the forage crops quite close to lambing, have introduced your concentrate feed and some of the silage, so that it's a gradual change from a forage crop based diet onto a silage concentrate or a grass concentrate type feed. But yeah, look at for people that can grow them, they're super feed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Amy, just one for you. Just a comment. Wondering, do you have any experience of using garlic buckets? Have you ever used any garlic buckets?
No,
No.
I have looked into it, but we haven't used them on our farm. That's for worm burdens.
Yes, for worms and flies. I do know for some farmers would use it. They're very good for mastitis control and would have good faith in them. But that's okay. I think that's it, Joe. have I missed any there? I don't think I have.
Just I suppose a few maybe there again from Michael. Could you bolus the ewes and do without the minerals in the ration?
Well, I suppose that depends on the bolus and what it carries. Like generally, I mean, most millers will be putting 25 kilograms of minerals into a ton. So that's kind of 25 grams a day for you getting a kilo, or a little bit less, maybe 20 grams a day for you getting 0.8 of a kilo of minerals. You'd want an awful big bolus to carry that, so boluses are generally fine for your micronutrients, the things that you need in milligrams per day, such as cobalt and selenium, iodine, copper, where there's small quantities going in, parts per million per day in terms of a diet. For things like magnesium and calcium and things like that, we're talking about grams, not milligrams, so I would suspect not, but I mean, I don't know every bolus on the market. I know on the dairy world there's boluses out there for preventing milk fever in cows and things like that, so I assume they're very big boluses carrying a lot of calcium, but I haven't seen them on the sheep side of the house, so my gut feeling is no. But I mean, I can't say that definitively because I'm not sure what bolus somebody's talking about. But if it's your general cobalt, selenium, iodine, copper type bolus, no, that's not going to replace what the mineral will be putting in there.
And I suppose there's another comment probably in there as well, with more farmers now relying on slurry for early grazing. There's a higher risk of grass tetany with high K levels. So that's a fair comment. Just Amy, there's one in there for you. What does Amy use for fly strike prevention?
Okay, so we would do the lambs once with Clixin, and we leave it as late as possible. So we'd wait until we've had a few cases of blowfly strike, and we'd treat those ones individually. And like when I say treat, I just mean shear off the wool and just wash it with water, and off they go, and they're fine. So once we've had a couple of cases, then we would put Clixin on the lambs, and that will wear off. So towards the end of the season, especially if it's a mild winter, we'll have a few cases sort of October, November time as well, and we'll shear off the wool there and just wash it with water as well. So we just accept that we have a few cases early and late on. I would like to move away from using Clixin, but it's just necessary for welfare reasons, I find, on our farm. So it's in the flock health plan.
Thanks, Amy. And Elaine, before I'm back, there's one just comment there from someone saying that there aren't many tillage farmers in North Mayo to buy off directly in order to keep costs down. The one thing that we've seen this spring is we've seen a lot of trade directly between organic tillage farmers and organic sheep farmers down the west coast, and there seems to be fantastic courier service available to courier meal across the country in 1 ton bags, and which is costing between 70 and 80 euros, and they seem to be willing to go from Wexford to Kerry or Wexford to Donegal. So I think that option is there for everyone to actually buy directly off a tillage farmer. So speak to the likes of Cathal there, or whoever your local advisor is, to see, is there somewhere you can source a bit of feed directly off a tillage farmer. So I'll hand back to you there, Elaine.
Just
Okay,
Joe,
Joe.
maybe I'll just make a
Yes.
point on the fly strike there. I suppose one of the products that is prohibited in an organic system is organophosphate, which is in most sheep dips. But there is sheep dips out there that don't contain organophosphate and can be used in an organic system. So just for that person that was asking that question, that they are available if you go and search them.
Thanks, Cathal.
Okay, thank you. Look, we've come to the end of our Let's Talk webinar. I'd first of all like to say a very big thank you to Barry, Michael, Amy and Cathal for joining and for giving us all as much information and answering all our questions in a very open manner. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our man behind the scenes that kept us technically going for the last hour and a half, and that's Martin. This will be recorded and will be put up in a couple of days so that if you want to go back and listen or look at the videos. I would also like maybe just to flag our next webinar is taking place on Wednesday, the 5th of April. And we were talking here about quality silage, and our focus on that webinar will be growing red clover. So if you're working in the sheep shed, I hope all goes well for your lambing season 2023. And from myself and Joe, thank you and take care. Bye-bye.